Well, welcome to AI Crafts. Let's dive right in. First of all, by a show of hands, who here builds product? Almost everybody. Who here who didn't raise their hand touches product in some way? That's the rest of you. Okay, excellent. First thing I'm going to have you do, which is very contraindicated to flow states, is I'm going to have everybody grab their phone out of their pocket and put it in the air. Excellent, okay. All right, great. Now, please text product flow to 33777. I am a researcher first, and you guys are going to help me do some research on how we can help make all of our products more flow state friendly. By the end of this talk, I'll explain to you what that means. Don't follow through with the questions after you get this. We're going to do the questions at the end of the talk. This is literally just to kind of get you going. And at the end of this presentation, I'll give you time to finish answering the questions, but the questions won't make any sense for now. All right, let's talk about AI. Consensus is split. From the downright apocalyptic, AI is going to threaten the existence of humanity, to a little bit less apocalyptic, AI is going to take away all of our jobs. Forbes recently wrote that AI is going to replace 300 million jobs worldwide, and those are full-time jobs. In the United States, 1/4 of Americans are worried about AI taking all of their jobs. That's a lot of people in the United States that are afraid of AI. But then we have the other people that say AI is pure bliss. It's going to do everything that we always imagined it would be. It's going to be the most happiest, the things that we're most curious about, and the things that we're, more importantly, most intrinsically motivated to do. Before I sell this for everybody, let me tell you a little bit about myself. First of all, my name is Megan LeGreve. I'm the founder of Carmies, of Exclamation Point Ventures, Let's Flow Baby, Product Flow, and MedX. I've also founded and led communities across the Wyoming and Colorado Spine Society, Women at Data Robot, the Data Robot Alumni Group. I've worked within Johnson & Johnson and Nielsen over at Data Robot, and I've been asked to speak at events or keynote at the American Advertising Federation, Techstars, Dale Carnegie Leadership, Data Science Go, and Women in AI. And last, I'm a huge researcher and advocate for everyone that builds products to understand not only what flow states are, but how to implement flow states for themselves and for their users. Okay, so what is this thing called flow? How many people here already know what flow is? Ooh, 1/3 of the room, okay. So flow state is also called being in the zone, in the pocket, some people call it in the cut, getting stoked, having a peak experience, or being blissed out. This guy right here is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He is considered one of the co-founders of positive psychology. He considers himself a happiness researcher. He was the first to identify and also research flow, and he is often called the father of flow. Mihai says, flow is a state in which people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. The experience is so enjoyable that people will continue to do it even at great cost, just for the sake of doing it. Now, can you imagine just for a second if your users had that state of experience while they were using your products? That would be freaking incredible. So in addition to speaking at companies on the topic of flow, I'm also currently interviewing product builders and product leaders for a book that I'm authoring that looks specifically into how we as product builders can use the growing body of science-based evidence on the topic of flow states together with AI to live massively happier, more productive lives filled with bigger insights and faster learning curves, and translate this research to help our users find flow through the products that we all create. Because let's be real, there's a huge giant elephant in the room. And that elephant is that AI will take many people's jobs, but it will gift 2 to 3 jobs for everyone that it takes. So how do we position ourselves and others to be in the best possible position? What will those new jobs be? Well, experts say that they will either be builders of AI or they will be users of AI. These jobs will require that you have the creativity and qualities that are uniquely human. And this will be a huge, huge, huge opportunity for those of us that are excited to do more creative work. First off, it does help to understand what AI is and what it's not. What AI is at its most basic component is it takes past data and past events, it finds patterns in those events, and then it predicts future events based on those past events. What AI cannot do and will never be able to do is be in the present moment. It's not designed that way. It can never be in the present moment. So that's where our unique gift of being human is. Flow states can only happen when you're in the present moment. I cannot drive that home enough. That is where all of the power and human creativity exists. So we've already went over this a little bit, but I'm going to drive in a little bit more. Flow is the optimal state of human consciousness, the state of deep focus where we feel and perform our best. Okay, so what does that mean? When we really sit down and look at it, what are the tangible benefits of flow? So flow is a 500% increase in productivity. Flow is a 490% increase in skill acquisition, aka learning. Flow is a 430% increase in creative problem solving. And my favorite one that I didn't put on this slide is that 100% of people who find flow also find happiness. And why is that? That's because flow is an inherently joyful state. It is a cocktail of 5 to 6 of the most blissed out neurotransmitters known to man. So who here wouldn't want more flow for themselves and for their users? Anybody? Good. I was hoping yes. Nobody raised their hands. I asked that backwards. Okay, this here is Stephen Kotler. He is the guy who was picked up from knee high, Csikszentmihalyi high, and taken on the flow torch, so to speak. He studies flow from a neurobiological perspective. So he looks at the neuroanatomy of flow, what's happening in your brain, and then he also looks at the neurotransmitters and the neurochemicals that are happening. And he maps all of these things for our benefit. So from a neuroanatomy context, what's happening is, I'm going to briefly describe this, but there's a lot more science that goes into it. I just don't have a lot of time now, and I'm not sure you guys, this is what you signed up for. So just really briefly, what happens in your brain is that there's this thing called the prefrontal cortex that's right in the front of your brain. It's what happens when you get older. It's one of the reasons if anybody has teenagers, why they don't have a lot of executive function. They look like adults, they kind of act like adults, but it really comes down to it, they don't understand cause and effect, like at a long scale. Because that's because executive function in your prefrontal cortex really starts developing in your mid-20s. And so this is like the highest and best use of your brain is your prefrontal cortex and your executive function. Well, what happens when you enter flow is actually very counterintuitive. Your prefrontal cortex actually, what happens is called transient hypofrontality, which is where your prefrontal cortex actually simmers down and there's not as much energy going to that. And that's because up here, who here knows a lot about AI or has built AI? Anybody? Okay. All right, so in AI what we talk about is signal and noise. And what we talk about is getting rid of the noise so we can focus on the signal. And if I were to talk about transient hyperfrontality in that state, what I want to say is that in this part of your brain, you have time. It's where your brain measures time. It's also where brain looks at your ego or your sense of self. And when you enter flow state, all of that goes away. So your sense of time disappears, and it can either slow down or it can speed up really fast. And also your sense of self disappears, so your ego completely goes away. And what that allows for is these huge leaps in creativity and insight. And so when you think about it, that those leaps of creativity and insight are the signal. And so the more your brain slows down and gets rid of the noise, the more you have these two neurons, they can start making these leaps between two neurons better and faster. And that's a really sort of rudimentary way of explaining what flow state is. Now, from a neurochemical standpoint, this is just, again, a brief overview. These are the 5 to 6 neurotransmitters that are flooding your brain during the flow state. So what you have here is dopamine and norepinephrine, which enhance flow, focus and alertness. You have endorphins and anandamide, which increase pain tolerance and pleasure, serotonin, which is a feeling of well-being, and then the last one is oxytocin. That one doesn't show up all the time. It only shows up during what's called group flow, and probably for obvious reasons, it enhances feelings of connection. There's one of these that I really want to point out. I'm not going to go too deep into it, again, because of time, but dopamine. You'll see it has a star there. That's because dopamine is the star of the show. So for those of you that like to wake up, check your phone, you like to get onto social media, you like to play video games, you like to watch Netflix, maybe you like to drink alcohol, all of these things are dopamine killers, are actually not killers, they just use up dopamine. And they use up what's called cheap dopamine, so that means that you don't have to put a lot of effort in, you get a lot of dopamine out. What that does is if you do that, especially first thing in the morning, get out, look at your phone for several hours, start playing video games, get on social media, you're draining slowly dopamine from your brain, which is going to prevent you from getting into flow later. It's a huge cost. Okay. In my talks on product flow, when I'm doing like a whole full day scenario, I teach about flow triggers. What you need to know about flow triggers right now is that these are preconditions to lead to more flow. And what they do, the main thing that they do is they drive you into the present moment. So there's 22 of these flow triggers. I'm not going to go into them, but I will tell you that there's two main ways that they help sharpen your focus. The first way is by boosting those brain chemicals that we talked about in the last slide. The second way is by reducing mental clutter, and thereby lowering the burden and freeing up mental energy so that we can focus better on the task at hand. By far the biggest flow killer are distractions, and this kind of leads us into one of several obvious ways that AI and automation tools can help us as a user and as a builder of AI. Okay, we also talk a lot about working with your biology. So it does no good to be in flow for 5 hours if the next morning you wake up and you can't make it to your meeting because you're completely burnt out because your neurotransmitters are just absolutely fried because you spent 5 hours in flow the day before. So understanding the 4 phases of flow is paramount to being able to capture repeatable and healthy flow, because there is such a thing as unhealthy flow. Flow is one of the most addicting states known to man. And so if you don't understand the 4 phases of flow, you can find yourself chasing flow and burning yourself out. And that is called the dark side of flow. So phase number 1, the struggle or the loading phase. This is marked by effortful learning and problem solving. This is where you might face challenges in understanding new concepts, new technologies, new strategies. You should just expect that this is going to be mentally taxing and understand that this is a phase of flow, The second one is the release phase. This is a necessary transition from the loading phase. So what I usually like to do during this phase is I put on my hiking shoes, I grab my leash, grab my dog, I go up into the mountains, usually Mount Sanitas, and I go for a hike. The whole idea here is that you're not thinking about the problem at hand, you're totally switching tasks, and you're looking for something that is completely different and more relaxing and engaging. Phase 3 is the phase everybody loves. This is the flow state. This is where your brain gets flooded with all these amazing neurochemicals and you feel incredible. You have a sense of hyper-intuition. You've got all these really great ideas. Some people feel like they're getting downloads. If you ever were in Boulder, so we probably have all heard this, where somebody's like, oh, I got the best download ever. And they're like, it came from God on high. A lot of times that's flow state is what they're talking about. This is a deep focus. Usually you'll have time distortion that we talked about earlier. You'll have an insane increase in productivity. And then this last phase, which I want to spend a little bit more time on because this is the one a lot of people don't understand. And this is the recovery and verification phase. This is characterized by active recovery and reflection. It's allowing insights and learning to solidify, and most importantly, it is sleep. So this is, again, I want to emphasize active recovery. This means you can go out with your friends, sit on a patio, enjoy a nice day, maybe do some journaling, really uncovering and dissecting what came to you during flow, read a good book, meditation, yoga, all of the things that we know we should be doing. These are all the active recovery states. All right, so putting it all together now is flow rituals. So what usually happens is after we end up talking about flow cycles, we go through all of the flow triggers and the flow killers, we put it all together and we create for each individual what is called a flow ritual. And we do this at actually the 3 different stages because it's usually for product people. So first we talk about how do we take the flow cycle and add into each stage of the flow cycle flow triggers or flow killers, not flow killers, but take out flow killers. For each person on a personal level, how do we build a ritual for you that makes sense for you so that you can get into flow on a regular basis? How do we then do that for the team so that as we as a product team come together, or as whatever team that you happen to be in, come together, how do we make sure that we enable the rituals so that it brings flow more reliably? And then last but not least, and this is the highest order, is how do we enable flow for our users? Because if we can get our users to get into flow, they're going to come back to our product over and over and over again because they are being more productive, they're being more creative, they're loving their life. They're like, got all that happiness going on in their brain, right? I will say product leaders love number 1 and number 2 because again, it gives them 500% more productivity, the quality of the work is better, the quality of the work is more unique and more novel, employees are happier as measured by NPS scores, and then they love number 3 well because when users are in flow, they see reduced churn, they see increased user retention and increased referrals. And this directly affects the bottom line, of course. Okay, finally, and building on the concept of rituals, who here has heard of Pavlov's dog? Yes, everybody. All right, cool. All right, so you know Pavlov was this wacky scientist who discovered that if you rang a bell and then fed a dog, read a bell, fed a dog, ring a bell, fed a dog, ring a bell, fed a dog, then eventually you could ring the bell and then the dog would salivate without the need for food. By creating your flow ritual, your own personal and unique flow ritual, you can actually Pavlov's dog yourself quicker into flow, so you can move through all of those 4 phases quicker. For me, my Pavlov's bell is putting on my hiking shoes and grabbing my leash. So even though I've just finished with stage 1, and I've just put all of this information into my brain, and I'm getting ready to hit stage 2 where I'm going to go for a hike with my dog, just by putting on the shoes and grabbing my dog's leash, I can start heading out the door, and the intent is to get my brain off of it, but almost nearly within 10 minutes now, before I even get to the end of my street, to the beginning of where the trailhead is, I start getting into flow and I start having all these incredible ideas and putting all of these different concepts together that were this far apart in my brain, start lightning cutting together, which means that I then have to pull out my phone and start putting audio recordings into my notes. Okay, so this is the end of the talk because I had about 20 minutes. If you don't mind getting out your phones again and filling out the rest of the questions, this would help me incredibly in my research on flow states and whether or not this is important and helpful. After you answer the questions, I will send you my personal flow state checklist, which I use every day to make sure that I have all the things in place in order to get myself into flow. And then to finish up, I don't know how close this will be to the future of human and AI, but I do know that we as product builders can have a really, really big outcome on how our users find usefulness in the technologies that we build. And if we can find a way to bring more people to the world, into the world that have bliss, productivity, creativity, and the presence that follows flow, then I think that's a really worthy goal. And I think AI can help us get there. Thank you.